So welcome to our webinar on transportation and racial justice. This is the fourth webinar in the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation's webinar series. We do have another one coming up, though the date has not been set, but we will email you about that if you enjoy this and want to hear more from coalition members. What you can expect tonight, we're going to start with a brief overview and a welcome, including how to use Zoom. Then we'll move into Dr. Kirk Harris's speech about social justice and equity and whether we're moving. We have several people to share local stories from around the state and spotlights on work being done. We'll have a brief conclusion and call to action, and then after that, we'll move into a Q&A. During the webinar, as participants, you'll be muted and your camera will be turned off, but you can still use the chat box. If you are having technical issues, you can ask questions in the chat box. You can also ask questions of the speaker in the chat box. Please note that everyone can see what you're sending, and so please keep it appropriate, and if you're inappropriate, we will kick you out of the meeting and you can watch the recordings. Please don't be disruptive. I don't think we'll have a problem with that, but this is our first webinar where we're keeping the chat box open, so use it for the powers of good. I see a tech question related to Zoom already. If you want to see the presentation larger or smaller, you can minimize or maximize your screen, and you can also click and drag the corners to make different sections of it larger or smaller. Greg can help in the chat box if there are further questions about this. So I'm Cassie Steiner. I'm with the Sierra Club in Wisconsin. I'm based in Madison, but work statewide. Our speakers for tonight, first we have Dr. Kirk Harris, who is a professor with UW Milwaukee. He teaches urban planning and the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. He focuses on racial and economic equity, social justice, constitutional issues in planning law and mediation and negotiation. So he'll be sharing a history and some context around transportation in Wisconsin and how that relates to racial justice. After Dr. Harris, we'll hear stories from two Milwaukee residents. Barbara Little is a transit rider and an advocate in Milwaukee, and so she'll be sharing her story. And then Lester Williams is the chair of Milwaukee Inner-City Congregations Allied for Hope, or MICAH. And he was a rider of the now discontinued JobLines in Milwaukee. So he'll be sharing about how important transportation is, especially to access jobs. We'll have Ilse Merlin Tiburcio. She is an advocate in Racine. She'll be sharing about how being undocumented prevents real barriers to transportation and different challenges that undocumented residents in our state face. And then Ashley Moncrief is the YWCA Madison Employment Services and Transit Director. YWCA provides supplemental transportation service for riders who can't get to their destinations. And so she'll talk about that program and why transportation access is important enough that it's part of YWCA's mission. So for those of you who are joining us who haven't been engaged with the Coalition for More Responsible Transportation, our vision statement is up on the webinar screen here. Our vision is that Wisconsinites deserve effective, convenient, and clean transportation system that connects everyone to the places they want and need to go. The state's transportation priorities should reflect Wisconsinites' needs and focus on improving quality of life, creating healthier, happier communities, and advancing Wisconsin toward a transportation system that benefits all people in our state. The next slide has pictures of one of our campaigns, one of our most notable campaigns that launched almost a decade ago in opposition to the I-94 East-West expansion project in Milwaukee. So the pictures on the screen here are from a press conference that was held, oh man, maybe in 2014, 2015, maybe earlier, focusing on concerns about that highway project, specifically environmental and racial justice concerns. And our opposition to this project has a very long history, and I'm bringing it up now because there was a recent development yesterday that I wanted to make sure we shared before we jumped into the content. So our opposition for this highway project was founded on environmental and racial justice concerns. In 2012, ACLU, MICAH, and Black Health Coalition of Wisconsin filed a lawsuit about the Zoo-interchange project. And in that settlement of the lawsuit, $13 million was allocated to fund transit lines that connected Milwaukee to job hubs in Waukesha County. And this was really an essential piece of access for people. In 2017, Sierra Club, NAACP, and MICAH filed a lawsuit against the I-94 expansion for very similar concerns about racial segregation and lack of transit access, as well as environmental concerns. In 2018, we saw that project canceled. Largely, it was canceled from Governor Walker due to budget concerns, but we were very happy because of the concern this project had on increasing segregation and further dividing our communities, especially in southeastern Wisconsin. In 2019, this funding for the JobLines project did end, despite a huge fight to keep that because of the important connection to jobs, and I know Lester will be talking about that more later. Alongside with this, we've released a report about transit access and equity across the state in 2018, and that was the Arrive Together report. So we have long worked on different intersectional issues related to public transportation and racial justice. The reason that I added in this context is because yesterday, Governor Evers announced that he would be revitalizing the I-94 expansion project, which we have very serious concerns about and have worked on for a long time as a coalition. Again, this highway was built to segregate communities and continues to perpetuate that and decrease access. So we have very serious concerns about it. And I think the rest of our conversation today will dive into how did we get here? What does this continue to look like for folks on the ground? And where do we go from here? What can we do related to transportation to increase racial justice rather than decrease it? So the final slide that I have are some pictures of our advocacy throughout the years. The coalition has held summits. We've held marches, press conferences, and done a lot of grassroots organizing focused on improving public transportation and access for Wisconsinites. So without further ado, I want us to be able to dig into that question, kind of how did we get here? So I'm very proud to hand things over to Dr. Kirk Harris, who will be talking about social justice and equity. Are we moving?
I'm Dr. Kirk Harris. I am a faculty member at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the School of Architecture in the Department of Urban Planning. I'm both a lawyer and a planner and have been working on issues related to the intersection of communities, family strengthening, planning, and policy for over 25 years. And have a very significant interest in questions of socioeconomic and racial equity in our American system, and have also served as the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities, which is a kind of an applied, both delivers some service, but it also works on applied issues related to institutional change and policy changes as it relates to family strengthening and community development. So, and of course, this issue of transportation has a significant implications for that work. So I'm glad to be on today. Well, structural racism is not only something that manifests in the transportation system, it manifests in every single system that operates in America, unfortunately. I know we're talking about transportation today, and but when we think about the larger historical context in which we understand racial inequality, we have to begin by appreciating that our society from its inception was racially divided. Chattel slavery was the fundamental structural issue that actually created enormous amounts of wealth in America. And it set up a system in which there were political, social, and economic relationships that supported that wealth creation and the subordination of individuals based on race. And so when we think about America as a system, we have to appreciate that fundamental beginning is the strand that runs through everything that defines the American experience. And so when we appreciate that, just reflecting back in my earlier comments that this issue of race permeates everything, and if we appreciate that, we can begin to understand why I say that. The other thing that's really important is when we talk about these issues of race, I often have to remind people that the issues of race are so fundamental, because if we talk about a society in which all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if we in fact believe that, if that principle is to be in play, then when we see these gross inequalities, these gross disparities, we have to question that principle. And we have to ask, how is it that we're living paradoxically aside that principle and seeing all these disparities? You know, I know this is not directly related to the question before us in terms of transportation, but I know what we've recently seen in terms of the George Floyd incident is just another expression of state-issued racism, in which these continued incidents of Black men being killed at the hands of police becomes just another reflection of how deep these issues are. And let us not forget that this is not the first instance that we've seen. I think we've had a very interesting reaction to that vis-a-vis other incidents, because quite frankly, I think, you know, unlike which is typical in America, where we consider ourselves individuals, this COVID-19 experience has kind of put us all in the same pot, experiencing the same fears and concerns, being homebound, etc. And then we had the unfortunate opportunity to witness a 9-minute killing on TV as a collective. And I think that really sparked something in people. And so I'm hoping that inflection point, as many of the inflection points that we've had in America, whether it be the civil rights movement, Reconstruction post the Civil War, or the George Floyd incident, that this becomes an inflection point that moves us to a point where we're different than we were previously. But to respond directly, I know that was a long preface, but to respond directly to how structural racism is manifest in the transportation system, what we have to understand is we live in a highly segregated society. And that segregated society produces displacement of or I should say the placement of resources in certain ways that advantage and disadvantage individuals. In our society, that advantage and disadvantage is premised on race and economic status. What we've done in our American segregated society is we've essentially subsidized the first of all, we've created policy to create the segregation. Then we've subsidized through a development in the form of suburbanization, in the form of highway construction, in the forms of urban renewal. We have then subsidized this segregation and created opportunities where we've separated people based on race and class. The outmigration, previous outmigration of whites from many of our major metropolitan areas also followed them was resources, and also those that displaced that movement, if you will, also created a subsidized response, which was in the forms of our highways. And it also created a very interesting challenge for us as a society, because what we had is we had individuals moving out to the suburban fringe, subsidized by federal housing policy, subsidized by highway construction, and it created a free rider problem because many of those individuals that were benefiting from the economic opportunities in the city weren't returning those dollars to the city for purposes of supporting it. And so what you had was individuals who were taking from the city but weren't contributing in any meaningful way. And economists call that a free rider problem, right? Because they took their tax dollars and everything else to the suburbs, and but yet they earned their income in the city. And so, and then, this gets exacerbated by public policies such as the one in Wisconsin, in which we allowed city workers to now operate outside of the city. They no longer need to be residents. It's just another way of displacing resources that should be existing in the city, being displaced outside of the city to the benefit of the region, but not to the benefit of the city. These kind of policies and practices create the splits and hyper segregation that we see today, and it just exacerbates the economic inequalities that permeate our society. One of the policies is the policy of segregation in and of itself. This, albeit no longer de jure, that is legalized segregation exists. The patterns of segregation that have been established through that de jure, those de jure and legal means are still firmly in place. And the fact that we still so heavily rely on highway construction, road construction, and minimize public transportation and other forms that would even, by the way, leave a much smaller carbon footprint on our society, we exacerbate, again, these inequalities. There are communities that are locked in to the the urban region, and but yet all of the development, jobs, and opportunities and resources that I mentioned in my earlier question are located in the region. And it's hard for individuals to navigate to the region because public transportation does not make the links easy. Housing is not available in those locations for those individuals, affordable housing. In fact, we've had incidents in the region in which mayors, in particular, a mayor in particular city, which I guess I don't need to name, but probably everybody knows, years ago had suggested that maybe it would be a good idea for those service workers who were in the city to have affordable housing, worker housing, and got a huge backlash because of the idea that you would have working class, low income workers come into the community to reside where they work. I think it's those kinds of systemic problems and reactions to making opportunity available to everyone is what continues to reinforce these problems. And in a democracy, and I keep going back to the democracy because as a lawyer, you know, I always kind of reflect on what are the principles that we allege to be operating on in this country. And one of the principles that we should be operating on, if we live in a democracy, we should all be sharing in the benefits and the burdens of society. And to the extent that there are those who are more, whose burdens are much higher and out of disproportion to the burdens of others, that represents a problem in our democracy. And so as we think of this question about mobility and the policies, remember, it's not only about mobility, it's also about access. So you can't speak about mobility without speaking about access. Access is limited by the segregation patterns and the practices. Mobility is limited by the policies which continue to create limitations for people being able to migrate outside to the region. And so both of those things, the confluence of both of those things exacerbate the problem that we have today. So we have individuals operating as second-class citizens essentially because they are not able to move where opportunity is. They are not able to go to the jobs. And if they are, it takes them so long and it's so costly, it makes no sense. And by the way, that just butts up against some of our other public policies related to our social safety net. A lot of times people under our existing social safety net have to work in order to receive those benefits. And so what you find is people working these low wage, non-living wage jobs, trapped in poverty. They can't get to the employment that might pay them a little higher wage, and they're stuck, and they can't afford the childcare and the other kinds of things that are so necessary for anybody who wants to be effective worker. So we ask a lot of individuals who are operating at the margins, who are vulnerable, and then we hoist on them these policies and practices that only make the situation worse. And so my view of it is that if we're going to address these things, we have to think holistically, and we have to stop subsidizing the privileged. And that's essentially what our public transportation, I should say our transportation system does. It subsidizes the privilege. It builds highways for individuals and roads for individuals who have cars, can afford to afford cars, and it worsens our environmental outcomes simultaneously. It makes no sense. So, with that long rendition, I would say there's so many things that are operating in our policy frame that just make no sense and just exacerbate the inequalities that we all say we want to eliminate. Well, let me just say that with respect to the question about highway expansion, growth, and development, in our urban renewal period in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, highways were the development of highways consistent with the public policies for housing development in the suburbs actually decimated Black and brown communities. In fact, they would run through those communities, and they would then create barriers between in those communities, locking those communities in an even further segregated experience. So highways have been historically a defining structure for what I would call inequality in America, in our urban region. And the other thing is that, again, as I said in my earlier statement, it subsidizes the inequality because it gives preference for those who can use vehicles, motor vehicles, to migrate to, I should say, to navigate the region. So to the extent that you don't have a car, and to the extent that you're taking the resources that could conceivably be evenly distributed to public transportation and hoisting it in almost completely into, or a large percentage of which is in highway construction, you're not having the appreciation of the benefits and burdens of those decisions, those policy-making decisions, and their implications for vulnerable communities who are segregated and locked in into our urban areas. So, so I think highways are notorious for that. I think our practices to support highways as a option, as opposed to investing in sound public transportation. Look, I traveled around Europe, and when I was visiting my daughter who was studying abroad, and they're just moving between countries in Europe and on public transit is just unbelievably easy and comfortable and very nice, by the way. And my view of it is I don't understand how we as an American society who claim to be so innovative and so conscious about sustainability or claiming to be wanting to be a leader in sustainability, we're still investing in these high carbon footprint strategies. So I think we need to do better. I think we need to begin to examine our history. And that's one of the things we don't do in our public policy making. We fail to examine our history. If anybody looks at the history of highways and development, and by the way, the other problem is that economic development that fuels, that is supported by highway development, simply itself also fuels inequalities because it continues to allow the outmigration of resources to the suburban region with no regard for ensuring that those opportunities are evenly distributed throughout the region. And so again, we have to be really mindful, and we as planners, as a planner, I'm always conscious about what every decision that is made from an economic development vantage point, how that is going to manifest itself in either exacerbating or addressing or redressing these issues of inequality. And so unless we're really deliberate and actually action oriented and doing that, we're going to be complicit in continuing to replicate the problem. Well, we all have to play a part. Groups like yourself have to organize and to call the question when you're seeing, as you are, when you're seeing these inequities and these policies that make no sense and that continue to foster both the sustainability problem and the equity problem, calling them into question, calling them to the mat. And asking, why are we doing this? And by the way, those public dollars that are being dispersed for highway construction are our dollars. And those dollars, when deployed, should be creating better, more equitable outcomes, not exacerbating the existing inequalities. And so this is not just a question of, we want to do the right thing, a nice thing, but everybody's contributing those public dollars. So those public dollars shouldn't be skewed in ways that benefit the privileged or those who are in a better position to navigate the region because they have cars, or because they happen to be located in the suburban region, or because they've now been released from having to live in the city. Because the state policy has kind of further drained the city of its resources by allowing such a policy to exist. So I think we have to begin to think strategically about what are the causes of all these inequalities and be committed to changing them. I think looking very closely at our economic development policy practices is one important step. There's a group called GAR, Governmental Alliance for Racial Equity, that has produced lots of discussion amongst governmental entities about equitable decision-making and using frameworks for deploying equitable decision-making across any number of things, whether it's transportation, housing, whether it's the development of parks, it doesn't matter. But that we have to use a lens, an equity lens in assessing all decisions that we make, because if we're not deliberate and purposeful, the undergirding system that we're all operating on is going to naturally produce the inequality, because that's the way it's been set up. And unless we deliberately challenge it at every moment, at every day, we're going to get the same outcomes that we've been seeing. So the remedy is us. And the remedy is demanding of our government a set of a revised and a renewed commitment to racial and economic equity. And look, government created this problem. I mean, it was governmental policy, deliberate de jure governmental policy. Our court systems reinforced that policy. So at every level, government created this problem. It still does today. Our large lot zoning is, the fact that communities don't want to have low-income housing located where they, in their communities. All of these things contribute to this ongoing disparity. And they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I suggest that we maybe get out of that insane cycle and begin to closely examine our policies using that equity lens. And maybe when you guys are talking to your kids about these issues, something would have changed. So I think that's all I have to say on that. I don't know if there's one thing. You asked me one thing to take away. I don't think, the reason I say one thing is because you have to understand that we're operating in a larger system. And so at every turn of their system, there's something that's creating the inequality, whether it's from the choices that we make in economic development, whether it's the policies that we develop in allowing certain resources to escape the city, whether it's policies that we don't hold people accountable who are benefiting from the city to support the city in terms of its tax base. I mean, there's so many places in which this problem resides. There can't be one solution. There has to be a multifaceted approach. So if there's one thing that I would say is that, one, it has to be comprehensive. Two, that we as a society, as individuals concerned, have to every day work on this problem because it won't work on itself. Three, that we have to hold government fundamentally accountable. This phone every once in a while rings. So what I would say is that, we really do have to hold government accountable. We have to remind ourselves that at every turn, there's issues that we have to deal with in terms of policy, and then we have to tie it to these larger concerns of sustainability of our society. Because when we invest in public transportation sources, when we invest in other means by which people can navigate the region, we're improving the ability of people to make choices and lessening the burdens on some that many experience, and heightening the opportunities for those communities to prosper. Pleasure to be of help, and I like the fact that your group is really pushing these issues. So, and I really do hope you continue to organize and connect these, and connect. And and one of the things that I liked is the fact that on at least one of the campaigns that it appeared that you really are trying to connect this issue of transportation to economic development, because those things are really linked, and appreciating how they are linked and how they kind of reinforce the challenges that we experience in terms of fairly distributing opportunity and resources throughout the region is key. So I appreciate you guys thinking really holistically, that it's not just about mobility, it's also about resource distribution. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I'd like to say again, thanks for the invitation, and good evening to you all. This is one of my, I would say, heartbeats, if you will, because just briefly, in 2014, when my car was repossessed, because I couldn't afford to have it, my prayer was, okay, Lord, while I'm waiting for another car, what do I need to do? And long story short, I was connected to MICAH through Caleb Roberts, who was our MICAH organizer at the time. And, he asked me to share my story because it was pretty hard getting to work from where I live. Now, I live just off of 95th and Brown Deer Road, and I was working in Mequon at the time. And so I had to get on the bus stop by 5 a.m. in the morning, ride the number 76 southbound to 60th and Capitol, and then get a red line or a Capitol Drive bus eastbound to Port Washington and Capitol to get the 143 Ozaki Express to get to Mequon. That was maybe like an hour and 15 minute to hour and a half ride one way each day, and the same way back. Now that wasn't as bad as when they cut the routes, or some of the routes weren't running. Like, for instance, the number 49 or 42U, which would connect Concordia College and MATC Mequon students to their campus from the I-43 park and ride. A couple of times I couldn't get a bus from the park and ride to get to Mequon, so I went on and I Google mapped it from I-43 and Brown Deer. That's a 3.8 mile hike. That's about say an hour and 15 minutes maybe walk, to get to my final destination. And it wasn't just me who had to walk those routes sometimes, or that route. There were other people that I rode the bus with. And not to mention, those bus lines didn't run on the weekend to connect people to jobs. Now, the company I worked for at the time was closed June 16th, or just June 17th of 2016, and I was transferred to the same company but a different location off of 107th and Park Place, which, by the way, is only a 5-minute drive from where I live. But if you had to walk it, it would take up to 55 to 57 minutes. Today, I surveyed that area from 96th and Brown Deer, where the 76 lays over at the end of the line, and drove from there to up and throughout the Lake Park, or just say Park Place, Liberty Drive, Westbrook Corporation area, if you will, off of 124th Street. And there are only 2 buses running in that area right now. And that's the Blue Line and the number 76, which are the only 2 buses that will connect people to jobs. So when I Google mapped the distance from 96th and Brown Deer, where the bus lays over, to 107, just say 10715 West Park Place, right in the same area where Educators Credit Union is, and up and around 121 100 North or West Park Place. That's anywhere from a 1.5 miles up to 2 miles, or a little more, just over 2 miles. 3 to 4 to 5 minute drive, but in upwards to maybe 45 to 55 to just say 60-minute walk. Now, 3 people I helped get to work from that area today. One person had to go all the way to Richfield, and we already had an agreement, had a plan for that. They got hired. They don't have a car right now. There aren't any buses to connect. The place that actually hired them was off of 124th and Silver Spring. The 63 does not run that far. It stops at Lover's Lane. And 2 people that I encountered on my way back from Richfield, and as I was going back to survey the land just before the meeting, ended up taking somebody home from a job right off of the 96th Street bus layover, and another person to a job called Weller's Truck Parts right off of 107th and I believe Heather Avenue. So that concerns me, because when I worked in that area off of 107th and Park Place for about 3 years, I encountered many people on the bus stops there. So there used to be the 279, the 223, the blue line, as well as the 23 in that area. But now there's only one bus laying over in Park Place, and that's the blue line. And so my idea, if you will, is to get the corporations involved, since the county is having issues with funding in that. I believe strongly that the Department of Transportation, instead of allocating funds for road expansion and road development, why not include public transportation in that budget? And also to get the corporate owners, if you will, the corporations to fund or help their employees get to work. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much for jumping in and sharing your really powerful story, Barbara. I thank you for jumping in. I think your story illustrates a lot of the points that Dr. Harris was talking about in a really real way. I think we can go to Lester, who is also in Milwaukee and a JobLines writer who can share, or former JobLines writer, I suppose, and can share his story as well. So Lester is the chair of MICAH and is going to share his personal story now.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I am Lester Williams. First of all, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. I am truly blessed and honored that you guys just give me this opportunity. So I want to thank, first of all, my pastor, my president of MICAH, Pastor Marilyn Miller, and the vice president Lee Henderson, and to my pastor, Pastor Joseph H. Jackson. The reason why I'm so passionate about transportation is because all my life, all of my high school years, all of my junior high school years, I caught the bus. And as I am an adult now, and back then, I think it was 2012, I moved back to the Milwaukee area, and I was looking for a particular job. And I was going to all these temp services, so I went to a temp service, and I got a job, and it was making I was making $10 an hour. Now I have kids, and I was paying child support on $10 an hour, and it was tough. And I started looking for other jobs, and I noticed that all the good paying jobs are in New Berlin, are in Muskego, and all out in the suburbs. And I'm like, wow, okay, is there a bus that gets out there? And every time I would try to apply for a job out in the suburban area, there was no way for me to get there. So I applied for this particular job. The name of the job is called SCI, Senate Containers, and it was on 170th and out in New Berlin. And I said, Lord, I prayed about it. I said, Lord, if it's your will, you'll get me out there. So the first day that I started was the first day that the route number 6 started. So throughout the whole entire time, I was working with also Caleb Robinson, who was at the time MICAH organizer, and he was just, I was talking with him, and he was letting me know, like, man, this is crazy, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah, man, it's crazy how there's so many jobs out here that there are no buses to get out here. And I began to ride the bus. The bus was routed from Port Washington all the way to Brookfield Square, and then it went along New Berlin Industrial Park. And while I was working, I was meeting interesting people, and I got asked to be a model, basically, for the JobLines through MICAH and the Black Health Coalition. And the lady by the name of Amy Watkins, she took my picture, and she said, "Well, you're done." I'm like, "Oh, okay, awesome." So here I am riding the bus, going to work every day. So I get a call from Joyce Elwinger. Joyce Elwinger and Pastor Elwinger. Joyce Elwinger, she says, "Hey, your face is all over. Your face is all over Milwaukee." And I'm like, "Huh?" So I'm getting all these calls, and it's crazy that I think about it now, is that transportation is so important for not only me today, because yes, I have a car, but you know, my car can break down tomorrow. You know, how would I get to work? Things happen. You know, sometimes we go through situations where we need the bus. We have so much going on, and especially in Milwaukee, you know, that when we get out to certain areas in New Berlin or Waukesha, you know, we're looked at differently, as if we're not wanted there. You know, and it kind of you know kind of hurt me a little bit. But when I was catching or taking the number 6 out there, I began to just view everything and look at everything in a larger perspective. And I saw that there were so many people getting to work. So now when they cut route number 6, it was over 500 people that lost jobs. Also, there were companies that had to shut down and close because they had no workers. So it's very adamant that we stop playing politics, and we stop doing this Democrat and Republican stuff, and really focus on what the people need. We need adequate transportation that will actually get people to the jobs. That's what we need. We need people that'll fight for this, and that's why I believe that God had placed me with MICAH for this particular issue. Me and Barbara Little sit on the same task force, and we're passionate about this. We're very passionate about this, and it hurts because we have so many brothers and sisters out here that are looking for jobs. And I'm not just talking about Black people. I'm talking about white people that look for jobs too, that are in the Milwaukee area that can't get out to where the decent jobs are. So let's stop playing Republican and Democrat, and let's really do something about this. Let's really get behind people who are fighting for this cause, so that our children are able to have a decent public transportational system. And also, we have a governor that I voted for Governor Evers. I'm not going to lie, I voted for him. But I think right now is not a time to, you know, start another construction or do construction on the road right now. It's, you know, we have far more bigger fish to fry than to work on 94. So thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Lester. That was a really great example. And thank you and Barbara Little and MICAH for all of your work on trying to save the job lines and your advocacy on public transportation. Really appreciate you. We're going to shift gears to a slightly different part of the state, and we're going to go to Racine. We have Islay Merlin Tiburcio, who is going to talk to us about barriers to transportation, especially for people who are not documented.
Hi there, there we go. I'm off mute. So my dogs are in the background. Sorry about that, but is this good? Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So I am Islay Merlin. I am a college student. I'm a DACA student. So if some of you aren't familiar, it's a executive order that was passed back in 2008, which allowed students and youth mainly who didn't have any type of social security number to obtain one. And with that, we could get a driver's license. So luckily, I'm one of those few that have, or not few, many that have a driver's license and can. However, that wasn't always the case. My mom, she is undocumented as well, and she does not have a driver's license. She does now, but she used to not. And here's the things that happen when you don't have one. You can't drive. Anyone can go ahead and purchase a car, register it, get the plates for it, get insurance for it, because that is the law. But you don't have a driver's license. So the thing that ends up happening is that you have needs just like everyone, just like I've been hearing. People need to get to their jobs. People need to bring their children to school. They need to go to doctor's appointments. And it's difficult because as an immigrant, you might not know the language. So being on a bus may not be the answer for you. You get a car with driving without a license. Unfortunately, the police do the racial profiling sometimes, meaning that you'll get stopped because of the way that you look, and you will get a ticket for those things. And those things can get difficult because now, on top of paying all these things for getting the car, you have to pay for your tickets. It gets kind of scary when you look at it through the immigration lens, just because anytime you encounter authority or police, there is a fear of deportation. So I know that is something that my mom did have to go through. People try to rely on friends and family members that can give them a ride, but honestly, they're not always there. And when you lack something, you feel like a burden. I do want to tell you, when I was 18, this is before DACA. I had to drive because my mom had just gotten separated from my father, and I needed to help her bring my sister to school because she would be at work. Well, being an 18-year-old, I was responsible, and I helped out my family when they needed to. And there was one occasion that I did get pulled over, and I honestly didn't know what to do. I was hoping that I could just step on it and lose the cop. Luckily, I didn't. I pulled over, but I was very scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. I ended up getting a ticket, and the cop was actually from Case High School. He pulled me over, and I told him I'm a student, I'm driving, I'm helping my mom out. And he said, but you don't have a driver's license. And I asked him, okay, well, did I speed? Why did you pull me over? Like, was I speeding? Did something happen? Is there something wrong with the car? And he pretty much just said, well, we scanned your license plates, we scanned your plates, and we saw that you are the owner of it, but we also saw that you don't have a driver's license. So that's why he had pulled me over. And it was very unfair because it's not like I did something wrong, but he did mention that he didn't know who I was, which was a good thing because he would only know the bad kids from the schools. That wasn't enough to convince him to not give me a ticket. I ended up getting a ticket, and he said he would drive away and he would just leave me to drive away as well. So these are just little obstacles that we go through sometimes. So I thank you for listening and taking this into consideration, undocumented people that and their needs with transportation.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Our final speaker tonight is Ashley Moncrief with the YWCA.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ashley Moncrief, and I'm the Director of Employment Services and Transit here at YWCA Madison. I have just about 10 years of experience scheduling transportation here in the Dane County area. I got my start in transportation working for Boys and Girls Club of Dane County as the operations manager. There, I would schedule rides for roughly 200 kids a day. In 2014, I came to YWCA as a driver in our sexual assault prevention program. In 2018, I was promoted to transit manager, did that for about 2 years. And then as of January this year, I became the Director of Employment Services and Transit. Here at YWCA Madison, we are dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Through our job training and transportation programs, we strive to improve the financial situations of our clients and their households. YW Transit is a community-based transportation program with 3 main services. These services include our Job Ride program, our sexual assault prevention program, and our community contracted transportation program. Most popular in transit. Most people who come to transit for Job Ride. Currently, we have 75 participants in this program. Job Ride is an innovative program that provides transportation for low-income people going to and from work. Clients are below 150% of the federal poverty income guidelines. Some of the key elements of our program, this is a 24-hour service. It operates 7 days out of the week and 365 days out of the year. Job Ride is a nonstop operation. Sorry, I'm doing this from my phone. So priority is given to those riders who cannot get to or from work within an hour and a half bus trip. Availability is determined on pre-existing routes. So when an applicant applies, they are added to a route dependent on their pickup and drop-off times. If that fits within the route that we have, we add them to one of our routes. This is a subsidized fare service, so fares range from being free all the way up to $2.50. That's just about how much it costs in the Madison area to take the bus program. If we are not able to accommodate riders immediately, they do go on our wait list. Unfortunately, there is no list. A lot of people will call in and ask, hey, how long is your wait list? And really the only way to get participants off of the wait list is someone would have to drop off of the program, or we would have to create new routes. 4 new routes, which we were able to add 20 new participants to the program. As far as eligibility, if someone resides on a bus line or has access to the bus, during the hours that they are requesting transportation, or that we're serving people who do not have access to transportation during those hours that the buses are not running, or in the areas where buses do not run. So one of our other programs is our sexual assault prevention program. This is a program that we're kind of revamping right now. This program started essentially as a service for women who were at risk for sexual assault, or for those who have experienced sexual assault. We have opened this up to more of a safe ride program for women in general. So as I was saying, this program is for women or victims who have experienced sexual assault. These are free rides that are provided every night. This program also operates every day of the year. So rides are available to be requested between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. Riders can call in to our ride line and leave a message with their ride request. We have one driver that comes in every night and checks those messages and creates a route based off of the rides that were requested. Rides are given between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. And these rides are just given within the city of Madison. Rides are not guaranteed every night. These rides are given on a first come, first served basis, just due to the fact that there's only one rider or one driver every night providing this service. We do prioritize crisis calls. So if someone is in need of getting to a shelter, if someone is fleeing a situation, if someone needs to get to a hospital, deciding those calls. Our contracted community transportation program is probably the least used of our transportation programs. We are in the process of refiguring this as well. We have just recently started a pilot program that I'll talk a little bit about later in the next slide. So through this program, different community organizations are able to schedule transportation to different events, activities, and programs. This service is available throughout Dane County. Again, these rides can be scheduled at any time during the day. YWCA and the other agency will work to find a rate of pay that is fair for both agencies. With this service, we are able to provide transportation with 5-passenger vehicles up to our 15-passenger vans. And we are also able to provide car seats for younger participants if we are transporting children. What I think separates our transportation program from other transportation programs is that I feel that we train and retain the best of the drivers. Are trained in cultural competencies. They are all trained in trauma-informed care. A lot of the drivers that we have on our team have been with our organization for over 5 years. So they are really dedicated to YWCA and our mission, but then also to the programs that we have here with YW Transit. This became very apparent to me within the last couple of months as our drivers have been driving through this pandemic. They've continued to provide transportation for essential workers who have needed to get back and forth to work. And they've done so so gracefully. They show up to work and they do their job, and they do it in a manner to keep others safe and to make sure that people are able to get back and forth to work to take care of others. So it's something that we are really proud of. A couple of other last facts about the transit program: we have 11 vehicles in our fleet, 4 minivans, 7 full-size vehicles, and like I said before, 20 professional drivers who work diligently to make sure that the gaps in transportation in our communities are met, and that people who need to get back and forth to work are able to do so in a safe manner, in a safe and affordable manner. So thank you for your time and allowing me to share about our program.
Great, thank you so much. Before we move into our Q&A, I wanted to send around an action that you can take. So a lot of people, a lot of our speakers talked about the concerns about the I-94 project coming back and that being prioritized over transit access. And so we'll drop the link in the chat for you to sign this petition that goes to the governor with your concerns about this. We're also encouraging you to take action by getting involved or donating to support one of the organizations highlighted here. So that was MICAH in Milwaukee, RIC in Racine. Wisdom is the umbrella organization of that. And then the YWCA in Madison, who are all doing really, really great work on transportations in the state. So a brief summary of what we heard tonight. Dr. Harris started by talking about the history of segregation in the US and how racialized policy, including results in isolation from opportunity, disinvestment in communities of color, and failures to engage those communities of color in solutions. Transportation access is also a mobility and accessibility challenge. So the increase of jobs in the suburbs, which was, I think, elevated through Barbara and Lester's stories as well. Lack of affordable housing, and lack of robust transit are all interrelated, and how being Black in a white space puts people of color at risk. And one example that Dr. Harris shared with us is biking while Black. And so we heard really powerful stories then from Barbara, Lester, and it'll say about how this really plays out for people. And then we heard one example of what organizations are doing around the state to, like the YWCA, to help fill those gaps. But of course, we know that we need a robust transit system that thinks about people and centers people to really solve this problem. So thank you for listening. We do have some time for Q&A. So Jadine, if you can stop sharing your screen, we will move into questions. And there were several that were sent in the registration form. And I thought this question was really interesting, and any of you can speak to this. Someone asked if they were wondering if not having a DMV on a bus route, needing identification cards to vote is a racial justice concern, and how so.
Can you ask that question again? When you say DMV, I'm not sure I understand what you say. What you mean when you say DMV?
Yeah, the Department of Motor Vehicles. So where you get your license.
Okay, I just, all right.
Yeah.
Are you saying that you think without having an ID, that would be an issue? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, the question was in some parts of the state, the DMV where you get your ID is not on a transit line. And so they were asking if requiring voter ID but not having access to the DMV for all people, how that plays out.
Well, I think, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it greatly affects our ability to vote and to register to vote. It takes me back, well, I was a little girl when, back in the 60s, when people of color were prohibited from voting or put through all types of schemes, if you will, to block us from voting. And it's happening even in 2020 still. It's mind-boggling, to me, when we're living in a world of technology and we're supposed to have all these rights and privileges that are yet being stripped from us still. It's just, and then the situation with our April primary voting session, when we were pulled out in harm's way, when we were supposed to be staying at home, if you will, to avoid the virus. We had to get out and go publicly vote, which didn't make sense to me. at all. So I think that is one of the issues. Anybody else, can weigh in on it, but those were just my thoughts that just came to mind.
If I could just echo, I think anytime you have an essential service, such as something as the Department of Motor Vehicle, hospitals, grocery stores, things that are necessary for everyday life, and people don't have access to that, that is a problem. When you add in the whole voter ID situation, now you are infringing on people's constitutional rights. It is our right to vote. And if you don't have access to an ID, you cannot do so. So I think that it's a huge problem, and there needs to be movement to address it, is what I'll say.
Thank you both. Another question that we received from registrants was that there seems to be and this is the word of the registrant, please address the trade-offs between the disproportionate impact of traffic crashes and traffic enforcement on communities of color. How do we improve safety without over-policing? And what physical changes to the street can we make, even if it takes a long time? I'm not sure if anyone has thoughts on that, and I'm not sure if Dr. Harris is still on the line with us. He might have thoughts that he could follow up with, but I want to see if anyone who's still on has thoughts to add.
Well, while we're waiting, I'd like to say we just have to call a spade a spade. I took classes some years ago with quite a few police officers at a Springfield College here in Milwaukee, and they admitted to racial profiling, and that class that we took was necessary to help us and help them learn to effectively communicate with people who of other cultures, if you will, especially those who don't speak English. Body language plays a big part in, and if you know from some cultures, certain things are just taboo. To touch somebody or to look somebody in the eye, if you will, in some cultures could be a sign of disrespect. But here in America, not looking a person of authority in the eye could inadvertently mean that you're guilty of something or you're hiding something. So we need to learn, from each other, cultures, what is acceptable and what isn't. And then I have Black sons and Black grandsons, and one of the meetings that I participated in a couple months ago, the issue came up, well, why do you think, mainly about public transportation? And I said, it is what it is. It's racial profiling, it's racism, and we have to address it. And those of us who are guilty of it need to be able to face the fact, that, okay, maybe I am a racist, or maybe I am prejudiced. What can I do? Because I'm a lot of times finding myself afraid for my sons who were raised to be law-abiding citizens. And they are grown men. One has a family. And, especially when they were younger and leaving home, a lot of times I would, make sure somebody knew where they were going. And my oldest son, he used to go to Mequon, MATC, and every time I drove him, we never got pulled over one time, but when he and his Black friend carpooled together, they were pulled over several times in that area. So, those are my thoughts and feelings about that. And hopefully, prayerfully, we won't have to live in fear or anxiety, about such an issue in the future, going forward in the future.
Thank you. There's another question in the chat box here. In many cities across the country, there are tensions between sustainable transportation advocates, like bike advocates, and people working toward racial justice. Can anyone speak to lessons learned that might work elsewhere?
I will yield the floor for somebody else to weigh in on that.
Yeah, Lester, I'm not sure if MICAH has worked in collaboration with Bike Fed in Milwaukee, or if you have examples of partnerships that you can share.
This is Jill Smith in Appleton, and this is not related to Bike Fed or social justice, but I watched an article on the women's suffrage movement, and they said that there are many forms of protest that clash. It's very common for that to happen. People have different views on different things, and they don't always get along, but I would encourage anyone to watch it on PBS. There's a lot of similarities in our fight for advocacy for our work on transportation. And if you watch that thing on women's suffrage, it's amazing how we can learn from what women did in 1920.
Thanks for that suggestion, Jill. And I think that there are other examples from the coalition work, but I want to make sure that we're hearing from our speakers tonight instead of some of the other folks. So we can follow up with some more examples, Adam. I think we are 5 minutes past time, so I do want to invite all of our speakers who are here today to share any last thoughts that you hope that people take with them as we wrap up tonight.
Well, I would just like to say, again, thank you for the opportunity to share my experience, and thank you for listening. I would like to encourage all of us who can and will to continue to not only advocate for better public transportation, but racial justice, period. And look for ways to help people get to jobs. And, I would encourage those who work for large corporations, you may even own your own company, give it some thought about maybe sponsoring or, helping somebody get to work. Maybe buy them a bus pass, give them a ride. Let's come up with a solution, for transportation. Let's get, DOT and whoever else who needs to hear us, to let them know how important it is to come up with the funds and the transportation to help people get to jobs, and not just jobs with sustainable wages or living wages, because some of the jobs that people have access to don't even pay a livable wage. And so that's something else we need to look at.
I believe also we need to look at the system or systems individually and do it's called a check and balance on all the systems. This has been happening for hundreds of years. You have to look at it as if, Black Americans, we only been free for what, 60, 70 years now? So there are so many systems that are put in place that allow certain people to advance. Public transportation helps the inner city. And like I said, public transportation belongs to the people to get to and fro from work to high school, to the gym. This system needs to be looked at. All routes need to be looked at. There needs to be someone in position to do a check and balance to say, okay, you know what, this isn't right. We as people need to start speaking up, not just Black folk, but white folk, Puerto Rican folk, Latin people. I don't care who you are. Injustice is injustice. And wherever there is injustice, there is bigotry, racism, hatred. It doesn't make any sense how, people can hate and be educated to hate or be educated to hate. I don't understand that, but we call ourselves Christians and we call ourselves Muslims and we call ourselves Jews and Yahweh or Allah or Jesus did not hate. So we need to, really look into these systems and start looking and start doing a check and balance and say, okay, this isn't right. Thank you.
In closing, I would just say thank you all for listening, for being present and open to hearing the content. I saw that there was a question in the chat box that came up a couple of times about how YWCA's transit programs are funded. And we are heavily funded through grants, but then also donations. So I asked Kabi to donate to YWCA. You can do so on our website, ywcamadison.org. Another thing that I think people can do is have conversations with your HR departments about how people are getting to and from work. Partner with different ride share programs in your community. Make that connection so that we all can be proactive about having different resources to get people to and from work. Thank you all again tonight. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
It's nice to meet you.
You too.
Ashley.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. That brings us to a close for tonight. If you want to get involved in the organizations that were featured today, the links have been dropped in the chat box, but we'll also follow up in email. I'm hoping that we can get a recording from Dr. Harris of his full presentation that we can send around so everyone can hear that information, and we'll send around the recording and the slides. I want to thank our speakers and the coalition for hosting this great event. And I do want to end with one final ask to take action. Sign this petition about the I-94 expansion project that has been mentioned several times throughout this webinar. And we hope that everyone has a great night as the storm slows down in a lot of parts of the state, hopefully. So thank you all for joining.
You're welcome, and thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure.
Nice meeting everyone.
If anybody has any questions or ideas, I'm open for suggestions. You can email me or call me. Good night and God bless.